All right, man. Cheers.
We are about 2/3 of a bottle in,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, from our Ghibli episode. It's funny because we just polled the A friends group asking for an idea, and as we did that, we came up with an idea ourselves.
Yeah.
So we'll figure it out. But what was our idea this time?
So we're gonna talk about Japan being represented in the media, specifically Western media, though.
Yeah, like American
right?
media
Yeah,
in particular.
American media in particular. Because like we were just kind of like spitballing topics, and then like we mentioned this, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, whoa, there's actually a lot to talk about here.
Yeah. Yeah, because you talked about how recently you started watching Shogun.
Oh my
on
God.
Disney Plus.
Okay, so first of all, this comes from a book.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a true story, but I think it's based on true events.
Yeah.
But anyways, I don't know who wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
I learned about it and then I forgot their name.
Yeah, I forgot.
But you should check it out if you're into books.
Yeah.
It's a very
Shogun.
amazing story. But I know it from the 1970s film.
Oh, you watched that film, the original one?
Yeah, there is a film series. And I'll tell you why I watched it, because I would never have watched 70s films by myself. Now I probably would, but when I was younger. But my Japanese teacher, he would show us, I want to say it was like a 6-part series or something like that, but he would show us like we would have a film day, kind of like the end of each month to like, okay, you guys have been working hard in Japanese class, so here's a little bit of Japanese history, right? And he would show these films, and oh my God, the story is really interesting.
Yeah.
And basically it's this life of this British sailor who they're trying to like pillage Portugal, like trading sites in Asia, right? And they heard about Japan, so they were trying to find Japan. And anyways, long story short, his boat is like nearing Japan, gets caught in the storm, and him and like 12 people survive the storm, but only he ends up being the only person to survive after a while, right? And it's this guy who obviously can't speak Japanese at all, and so but he's forced to live in Japan as a captive initially to this like local daimyo or warlord, right? And so it's a really great way, especially if you're a Japanese person, it's a really great way to look at your culture through the lens of a person who has no idea what Japan is. Yeah. And especially it's a very turbulent time, because I think this takes place in like the 1600s.
Yeah, right.
Where I want to say it was like I'm not very good at like time periods, but I want to say it was like Tokugawa.
Yeah, Tokugawa. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like Japan's very much still a feudal state. There's war constantly going around, and it's like this outsider's perspective trying to like understand what the hell is going on in this country.
Yeah,
right. And over time, he starts like learning Japanese, and he starts like adapting into the culture and everything, and he ends up like kind of rising to a point of power. Yeah, like later in the story, and it's amazing. Yeah, I couldn't recommend it enough.
But is that the 70s movie you're talking about, or are you talking about the modern one?
The 70s one.
70s one. Okay.
I mean, I've just now watched the first episode. It's on Disney Plus, but I think it stars. It's not like it's like vaguely associated with Disney. But so far with the first episode, they've kind of changed like a little bit of detail, but it's mostly stuck with the original story. I think the thing that they focused on a little bit more with the new show is like they're giving the Japanese characters in the show a lot more screen time. Whereas like I think the 1970s one, and obviously the book, because the main character is the British guy. Yeah. Right. A lot of what's going on is kind of done through his point of view. Right. Whereas like the newer version, he's still the main character, but like there's a lot of like other characters in the show that like they're getting like almost as much screen time as he is. So they're kind of like, it's really interesting because they're kind of like going into like what it was like being a samurai at that time. So, oh man, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because now, was it Sanada Hiroyuki, who's like, who does he play in the new one? Does he play the Shogun guy?
He plays like, I want to say like I don't know the politics at the time, but he's like a mid-level warlord.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably, okay.
Yeah, so I guess like daimyo?
Yeah, it could be a daimyo.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But it was funny because I watched an interview with him recently, and he was talking to an American audience about how he's a co-producer of that show, actually, and he wanted to make it more like authentic.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the same director that did Last Samurai, right?
Zwick,
or maybe some I don't remember.
I don't know. I don't know
very
anything about that
European
movie.
sounding name.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. It's either the same director or the same producers.
Okay.
But you get this like very raw feeling of Japan. So far in this series.
Yeah.
Like they have not sugarcoated how things were back in feudal Japan times.
Okay. It's pretty graphic, right?
Yeah, it's pretty graphic. Like, you know, I'm not going to spoil stuff for people who haven't seen it, but like random people just being murdered when samurai walk into a village is like not something they hide.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I appreciate that, but they also like kind of take the original tone of the book, kind of like paints Japan as kind of being this like savage place, but like beautiful. But I feel like they've kind of like removed the European bias from that.
Okay.
And they've kind of like gone, okay, well, you know, yeah, there's some pretty savage stuff that does happen here. But it's like, we're trying to introduce Japanese culture and like really show people what it was like. And it's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I can't give it enough praise.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because now when you talk about that reminds me, that really feels really different from, let's say, The Last Samurai. So first, we should talk about like influential movies or media that kind of inform American audiences about Japan.
I was just talking to you before we started this episode about how I have a love-hate relationship with Last Samurai.
With Last Samurai?
With Last Samurai. With Last Samurai. You know, first of all, before I start giving my opinions on it, I was really surprised to learn how popular that movie is here.
Is it really popular here?
Yeah. Like, maybe I'm crazy. I haven't done a poll of the entire population.
If you guys
of
have
Japan,
seen Nasto Samurai, please tell us in the comments.
But I've talked to a lot of people, my wife included, but a lot of my friends here, and they seem to really like Last Samurai. I don't know if that's just because people really like Tom Cruise in Japan.
It's probably, that's a big one.
That might actually be it.
Yeah.
Because Tom Cruise is huge in Japan.
Dude, back when I was skinnier, right?
Yeah.
And like I would go to Rio. No.
I don't know where you're going with this.
And
wow, you look like Tom Cruise.
Yeah. I remember, like, I went to Ryokan with Natsume. Said, "Oh, Tom Cruise," or like, "Oh, you look like Tom Cruise," which is funny because in America people would say I look like Matt Damon, but because we have like the Irish eyes, whatever.
My wife thinks I look like Leonardo DiCaprio.
They call me Leonardo DiCaprio too. I think white people are Tom Cruise or Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, I feel like just being like vaguely like. Leo's not fat, but like if you have like a round face and a beard and brownish hair, that means you're Leo.
You are white person with beard, or you are DiCaprio. Yeah.
But yeah. So okay. So going back to like, you know, how I feel about The Last Samurai. So when I first watched Last Samurai, I first of all, before I talk about, I'm going to pronounce it samurai. I know it's samurai. Right, I understand that, but I'm American. Yeah, it's just.
Well, the official title is Samurai. So.
Yeah. But anyways, so when I first saw it, I remember thinking it was a really cool film because it's like, wow, you know, it's like they really showcase like what it was like to be a samurai at this time. Like it's a really, really interesting time period to write a story about Japan because like there's like these two like cultural identities battling in Japan. It's like, what do you want to do, Japan? Do you want to like join the West and become like this kind of like imperial power, or do you want to remain a feudal state? Like, who's in charge? Is it the shogun? Is it the emperor? It's like there's so many interesting things going on at that time in Japan that it's so cool to write a story about that. But like also it's like you have this third party coming in where it's like America coming in and just being like, hey, so it's time to start trading with everybody.
Yeah.
And it's like Japan kind of dealing with that and going, okay, well, we've been fighting the past 300 years with swords and then these guys have guns.
Yeah.
How do we deal with this now?
Well, so here's the thing that I want to bring up, because by that time, all samurai used guns.
Yeah.
All that time. And it's funny because, when the first movie I watched that really dealt with Japan was The Last Samurai, right?
Yeah.
And I remember because I had just started learning Japanese and my mom said, Arthur, you need to watch The Last Samurai. It's so good. You would love it because you love Japan.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Mom, come on. I'm not going to like it. It's just Tom Cruise is a samurai. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But then I watched it and I really liked it. And then I became fluent in that. Then many years go by and I became fluent in Japanese. I moved to Japan. I got used to life here. And then I watched it again with my dad. And it felt so weird to me.
Like I went through a same feeling where it's just like, oh, why is this white guy in the film?
Yeah.
Like what the hell? Why is this like, you kind of wanted like the purity of just like, I just want to see Japan.
Well,
right?
it's not just that. It's like, so like that movie may be different from Shogun, but that movie really holds samurai to like an idealized state.
Yeah.
Whereas most of them were just like, hey, we have swords and we have authority to kill you if we want to. Just listen to us. We're going to collect your taxes.
Sure.
And there was not so much honor for a lot of people. There were a lot of poor samurai actually by the end of the Meiji period.
Yeah.
But just looking and seeing how that movie basically is saying, underneath the veneer of modern Japan, this is what's at the soul of Japan. But it seemed like a caricature. That it was. It's almost like if a Japanese director, producer, whatever, wanted to make a movie that embodies the American spirit, and they made it a cowboy movie about a guy who doesn't get drunk.
Yeah.
And he protects the women.
Yeah. And
he abides the laws and he kills the bad guys. You know, and like, I don't know. That just feels, it just doesn't match to me.
Yeah. No, I definitely see where you're coming from there. Yeah. I've since kind of changed my opinion on it. And I think you brought up a really good point when we were talking off screen about this, where a lot of my issues were if you watch the film, at least like very much on a surface level and kind of like a little bit deeper too, Tom Cruise starts being the embodiment of like the Bushi spirit of like, what it is to be a samurai, right? And I had a really big problem with that because it's like, okay, well, this guy's like a white guy who's like kind of like rallying everybody and like, it kind of comes across that he's kind of like leading the samurai into battle and everything. Yeah. And, you mentioned this earlier. It's like, well, he's not really the white savior. He's the guy that gets rescued and redeemed. Yeah. Right. Because his character in the film is actually like a really terrible person. Yeah. Yeah. He is. Right. He comes from like Manifest Destiny era America, where
kill all the engines.
Yeah, it's like it's not there's no definitive number, but they've estimated that like 9 million Native Americans were killed at this time, because America was just like, hey, Native Americans, so we made all these plans with you. You guys could live in these areas, but we kind of want those areas now. Yeah. So either you leave or we kill you. Yeah. But it's okay, because if you leave, we're just going to kill you anyway. So, yeah, right. So like, he has all this PTSD from slaughtering Native American tribes. And the guy is an alcoholic and he wants to die. Yeah. Right. And the whole thing of him going to Japan is like, he wants to get killed in battle over there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so eventually he like fights in battle and like, he impresses like this local clan leader who's like trying to like rally the last samurai in this area, and he ends up getting redeemed, right? And that's his character. And so it's not really about him becoming Japanese. It's about him like being saved by these people and then adopting their identity and like fighting with them. Right.
Yeah. I think to really like that movie, you have to, because it's a good movie.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that it's not a movie about Japan and its reality.
Yeah.
And there are values that are being communicated through the medium of Japanese culture almost. Yeah. And so like there's a lot of things wrong with the movie, but it's actually, I mean, historically or whatever, but it's actually a really well-made movie.
Yeah. I feel like the intent of that movie, like it was made to say, like it was obviously made for a Western audience, right? And it was made to go, okay, you guys don't really know what Japan's like. Here's like a couple things in Japanese history that we've put together. And here's this time period that Japan was kind of transitioning into kind of becoming more Westernized. And here's that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I almost feel like that's almost like a reaction to what was happening in the 80s. Because have you ever seen any 80s American movies based on Japan? Have you seen Black Rain? The Karate Kid? Oh, so the Karate Kid. So the Karate Kid isn't necessarily about Japan. It's about martial arts that was cool from Japan, right?
But it's not even really from Japan, depending on who you're talking.
From Okinawa, I know. But so the movie that comes to mind, and this is probably because this is the movie that my dad liked, is Black Rain.
I haven't seen it.
Which is a Michael. Is it Michael Douglas? Who's the no Charlie Sheen?
I have
Who's his
no
dad?
idea.
Who's the main character of Wall Street? Gordon Gekko's character.
Oh.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
I want to say I've seen Wall Street. But
okay. It's Charlie Sheen's father.
Yeah.
I think his name is Michael Douglas. If I'm wrong, please tell me in the comment box below. But Black Rain is about an American detective, police dude, FBI. I don't know who he is. He goes to Japan to investigate like an international crime syndicate, and he gets involved in the Yakuza.
I swear I've seen this movie.
And there's like someone gets shot in like a bar or a cafe or something. It's very like bloody and stuff. Because I feel like back in like the 80s and the 90s, everything was about Yakuza and like modern Japan stuff in the 80s.
So I don't know if you're familiar with like sci-fi genres. Yeah. But
what's the name where everyone's a robot and you have to kill the robots? They made a.
No, I know what you're talking about. I'm just.
It starts with
drunk.
a B. Starts with a B. It has Harrison Ford.
I know it has Harrison Ford. I'm drunk. Movie? I can't remember the name.
What's this movie? Man, it's super famous,
dude. I feel like we gotta pause it just so I'm gonna look it up.
I know. Seriously, I'm gonna go look this up. Okay, but anyways, so like
So what I want to get into is cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk is a sci-fi genre that I'm gonna get pissed off when you tell me the name of this because it's one of my favorite like remakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Minority Report. Anyways,
no, it's not.
We're gonna go. I'm sure it's driving everyone nuts watching this because they probably know it.
I know.
But anyways, so cyberpunk is a genre that was invented because a lot of people predicted that Japan in the 80s would end up becoming the world's superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Blade Runner.
Oh my God. It's such a good film.
Yeah,
both the new one and the old one. They're amazing.
Yeah.
But like Blade Runner takes place in the dystopian future. And I want to say it's Los Angeles.
It's Los Angeles, yeah.
But it's
in the year 20. I think it's like 2025 or something.
But these films take place in futures where like Japanese business companies kind of like end up taking over the world in a sense, where countries kind of cease to exist, and instead of the governments running cities, it's these mega corporations.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is actually kind of similar to nowadays. Yeah. Actually.
To an extent, for sure. But like this whole idea of cyberpunk comes from Japanese culture, and it's like kind of actually more of fears of Japanese culture of like Japan taking over and like creating these dystopian areas.
In Blade Runner, he orders noodles in Japanese.
Yeah.
It's
because Japan took over the United States.
Yeah.
In the history or in the like in the future in that film. but not through military action. It was like they just bought it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, because at that time, actually, a Japanese dude bought the Empire State Building. Did you know that? There was a period in the 80s where a Japanese dude owned the Empire State Building.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there was all this push of like, it's kind of interesting because depending on the era that the film is supposed to be portraying, kind of depicts the lens that Japanese culture is shown in movies.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. So what I mean by that is if you go through, if you go to like period eras where it's like the Tokugawa era or like the Meiji Restoration era, Japan's kind of like, I want to say it's like kind of given like rose tinted goggles, like, oh, look how romantic samurai are. Look at all these beautiful things. Like, look, everyone's wearing kimonos, and like, look how beautiful Japan was like back in the ancient times, right? And then you actually see something similar in Western media depicting World War II.
Okay.
So I want to bring up a few examples. So in World War II movies, actually Japan's featured quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna give you some stark contrasts here. So you have the movies Saving Private Ryan and Fury.
Okay.
Which talk about the Eastern Front in Europe, where Americans are fighting Germans. And one thing that's synonymous with Germans in World War II films is they are the bad guys.
Yeah. They're like the devils.
You will never see a war movie set in Europe with America fighting Germans and Germans seeming like decent people.
Yeah, right.
They're always just depicted as like the worst human beings you could possibly think of, right? But you don't see Japanese soldiers portrayed in the same way.
Okay.
So
what are some movies that come to mind?
I'll bring up a couple examples. So first of all, you have the movie Pearl Harbor. Which obviously, judging by the name, depicts like the history and like everything happening in Pearl Harbor and kind of like immediately after that, right? The military in Japan is depicted as competent and very professional and organized. You have the general or the admiral, I forget, Yamato. I want to say
Yamamoto.
Oh, Yamamoto. You have him like kind of talking with the emperor, like when they're planning out this attack, right? And he's like, I'm going to be honest, I think this is a really bad idea and we shouldn't go to war with America because I think that like he has like a really famous quote of like, we're waking a sleeping giant.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of respect given to like depicting the Japanese military.
What year did that come out?
2001.
So I think that's
something
really
like
key,
that.
man. Because we have to talk about. I think it makes more sense to talk about not necessarily the genre of the movie, but the period in which it came out of.
That's a good point.
Because think about back in a movie that really comes to mind when I think about Japanese portrayals is Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Okay.
Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
Okay, well you should. At least the one scene. So do you know who Mickey Rooney is? Yeah. So Mickey Rooney plays Audrey Hepburn's landlord.
Okay.
And she leaves every day and he's a Japanese guy. You have him playing like Yellowface, right? Yeah. And so he has the buck teeth dentures in and he says, I think her name is not Tiffany. I forget what her name is, but he's like, where's my rent? You know, when he talks in like a weird Japanese voice. He's like, I'll have your rent for you soon, Mr. Yamamoto. It's the 5th day. I need it now. They like make him seem like an idiot, right? Yeah. They actually have a scene where she lives in the unit below him, and I guess she makes a noise or she makes a move, and he's like doing some sort of like traditional Japanese art kind of thing or whatever, and there's a shake, and he like makes a mistake, and he's just he gets like super angry, you know, and that's like 50s, 60s right there.
I will say that I think there's a big difference between how Japan is portrayed in film versus how Japanese Americans are portrayed in film.
Oh, but he's not Japanese American. He's
is this not take place in?
No, it takes place in America, but he doesn't. He's not a native English speaker. Okay, so if anything, he's an immigrant. Yeah, you know. Yeah, but then when you get into the 80s, like I talked about, you have the Yakuza stuff and like all the fighting thing. Like the Japanese are strong and scary kind of things. Yeah, and then in the 90s, you have like Power Rangers and like Tokusatsu
Oh man,
tech stuff.
I would love to
Yeah.
talk about the Power Rangers because
And we will, but I just need to finish this thought, man.
Yeah.
But then when you get into the 2000s, it's like Japan is an honorable society. Let's look at how these are actually good people.
Yeah.
And
after anime was implemented.
right. And after they stopped being a threat, like an economic threat,
Yeah.
it actually really, I feel like it almost like parallels kind of how Native Americans are portrayed in media in the States, because now you have all these movies about like the noble Native American. Look at all the bad stuff that America did to the Native Americans. But during the 50s and the 40s, when that was still kind of fresh.
I feel like I mean, obviously, like the 50s were just full of racism, right?
Yeah.
But like, I actually feel like, especially with Western, a lot of like the Native American, like, let me explain where I'm coming from on this before I sound ignorant. I'm thinking of like Lone Ranger.
I've actually never seen Lone Ranger.
Okay, so Lone Ranger has got this partner who's a Native American. I think he's like in the story, he's like an Apache tracker where he's like really good at finding people, right? And he's kind of like the Lone Ranger's best friend. He doesn't speak at all, but like they're partners and they do everything together, and like he treats him with quite a bit of respect, right? And so like when I think of like Native Americans in film, I kind of think of like that, where it's like they're kind of like partners.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of representation of them just being savages and
the enemy, you know, like when you look at before 1950, you know, like I remember, so I'm from Massachusetts, right?
Yeah.
And the Massasoit Indians are gone. They've been dead for a long time, but you still have writings from people talking about they are devils, they are coming to kill us, they are messengers of Satan, you know, because they are seen as the enemy.
Yeah.
And that they are the enemy plays in even like, you know, when in my dad's generation, they would play cowboys and Indians, and the Indians were always the bad guy, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the same thing with Japan. Like, of course, after the war, you still had the economic threat, and there were people boycotting Toyota cars, being like, I don't want no Japanese-made car. I want my Ford, American stuff.
100%.
And then when that stopped being a threat,
it's
like, oh, Japan is such a beautiful society that's respectable, and we should learn from them. And then The Last Samurai comes out, and like Pearl Harbor, you know, all these things.
Oh, that's a good point. I never really thought about that.
Yeah. But we can't talk about your favorite period of film. Do you want to talk about the Power Rangers stuff?
So I didn't even know the Power Rangers were Japanese
until
I was an adult.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. It was such a weird thing. I'll tell you how I found out about it, because I love the Power Rangers. Oh, what little boy didn't like the Power Rangers?
In the 90s, growing up in the 90s.
Oh my God, right?
Yeah. Go Power Rangers.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm a little upset because the Power Rangers aren't even the Power Rangers.
Yeah.
That's just the American, like...
Yeah. The Go Ranger, right?
So basically, what are they called?
Oh, in Japan, they're called Go Ranger because there's 5 of them.
Yeah, right? So... Here's how the story of the Power Rangers came into existence. So basically, there was this show that had like the Power Rangers on it, right, in Japan. And it was a really popular kids show. And basically, an American company looked at that and there's like, this is pretty great.
Yeah.
But we're going to take just the footage and we're just going to use it to make our own story.
Yeah.
And that's just what happened.
Pretty much.
So they took like especially I'm talking about the original Power Rangers, because eventually they hired American actors to act as like and to continue. But like this is like, I don't even know if it's the first season or like a pre-season, like 92, to the first, 93, right?
Yeah.
But they took literal film from the original show, or the Japanese show, and they just like edited it.
Yeah.
To just make their own show. That's completely different from the Japanese one.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's funny because I grew up on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which was the second one. It's the American one, right?
Yeah.
And that's when like all of the robots are dinosaur themed or whatever. And it was so funny because when I was 4 years old, I wanted the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers watch thing that they would use to transform or whatever. It was so cool. But just the other day, I was showing Lewis these. My son Lewis, these videos from the 90s.
Yeah.
And he loves the robot transformation scenes. But I'm watching this and I'm like, this is totally Godzilla-esque Japanese tokusatsu filming techniques.
100%.
Yeah.
It's just a dude in a costume kicking cardboard.
Yeah, basically. And so it's funny because even though that's not necessarily depicting Japan, that is so Japanese.
It really is. It really 100% is, because it's just like, it's such a unique media style.
Yeah.
Because like, you know what? I'm gonna make a risky statement that I think even like younger generation, like Gen Z and like whatever they're called these days, like younger people that are like in their 20s and maybe even teens these days, at the very least, maybe they haven't seen the full movies, but at the very least they've seen clips of like old Godzilla films.
Yeah, right.
Where it's just like a guy in a costume just kicking cardboard.
Yeah, basically.
You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's so endearing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Goes
it's
in
like
cycles.
You just see it and you're just like, oh, isn't this adorable?
Yeah.
It's just, it's so ridiculous. But it's kind of like, I would kind of equate it to like Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
In the sense that I think like the Fast and the Furious movies, no one's watching them because they feel realistic, at least after the first two, right?
Yeah.
But they're watching them probably much in the same way Godzilla films. Like, I don't think Godzilla scared anybody.
Yeah, right.
When he first came out, everyone's like, no, this is a guy in a costume kicking cardboard.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Yeah.
You're like, I want to see Godzilla fight Mothra. Yeah, let's do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like two dudes just like wrestling in a room.
Yeah.
with like city buildings made out of cardboard.
Yeah.
And it's just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just, what was I going to say? I feel, I really see, how Japanese cinema really influenced America, because back in the 60s, I think it was, what was it? The Magnificent Seven came out.
Yeah.
And that's based on the Seven Samurai.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Like,
and then
like the story is exactly the same.
Yeah, just cowboys and not samurai, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have like the tokusatsu stuff with Power Rangers or whatever.
Yeah.
Did you know actually that the first Godzilla is a metaphor for the atomic bomb?
I've heard that before. I don't really understand. Like, I guess this is Godzilla destroying cities.
Yeah,
but
he's supposed to personify the destructive force of the atomic bomb. And then he fights Mothra and King Ghidorah and becomes like the rah.
Yeah.
By the way, so just on Cartoon Network, did you ever see?
You're gonna say Dexter's Lab?
No, not that.
Okay.
No. I mean, of course, Dexter's
Lab.
Lab.
Godzilla TV show.
And did you see with Godzuki?
Oh.
Do you remember Godzuki?
Dude, okay, you just brought back a dark memory and Godzuki. Oh, God. Oh.
Yeah. So for those who have no clue what we're talking about,
memory until you brought
dude,
that.
I love that show, man.
I hated Godzuki. He was so dumb.
I know he was dumb, but I love that TV show.
He was like Scrappy Doo from Scooby-Doo.
So we got to explain what this was. So actually, in America, Godzilla became a cartoon series, and we talked about in Ghibli how cartoons in animation in America is for kids. And so they wanted to make Godzilla more family friendly, so they made Godzuki, which is like a baby Godzilla sidekick that he works with. But do you remember the song "Up from the Depths, 30 Stories High, His Head in the Sky"?
Yeah.
Godzilla.
Godzilla was like, this was during, all right, you guys, I'm sorry people watching this, because you're not going to understand like where I'm coming from this, but this was made in the 70s in America, where everyone was trying to copy a cartoon show called Scooby-Doo.
Oh yeah, right. Scooby-Doo, yeah.
And so Scooby-Doo is about these teenagers with a dog, and they solve like mysteries of people pretending to be monsters, right?
Yeah.
And so Godzilla, following that formula, had this teenage group solving mysteries. Yeah. But then at some point in the episode, Godzilla, a literal giant freaking monster that's like 30 stories high, which who fucking knows how tall that is? Yeah. I'm sure you can measure in math, but just shows up in the middle of the show and does like random, and it's like, my work here is done, and then leaves.
Yeah. You know, I remember some of the Scooby-Doo episodes. I don't remember a single one of the Godzilla.
If you watch them, they're the most random thing. And it's just like Godzilla will show up and like, whoa, Godzilla, he's rescuing the cat from the tree. Wow, thank you, Godzilla. And he goes back down in the water, and then Godzuki's like, and does some dumb sound. And it's just the dumbest. Oh God, man! Like I said, you just awoken a repressed memory from my childhood.
I just remember the theme song, so there's nothing wrong with me.
Oh my God!
So it's just a question for you. Have you? So going back to like portrayals of Japan in the media, not Japanese influence media, but one movie that I saw recently that I really like, that also I feel is really true to life. At least a lot of Japanese people feel that way too. Is Letters from Iwo Jima. Have you seen that?
Beautiful film.
Yeah.
Beautiful
I
film.
cry every time I watch that film.
Yeah.
Have you seen Flags of Our Fathers too?
I have. I've seen them.
I haven't seen that one yet, but I know they're like on the same.
You know, it's I will say something that's pretty interesting about those films is they're depicted as very differently from have you seen The Pacific?
No, I haven't. So I don't watch many war films.
I mean, I guess it's just because I was a military guy. I love war films. I watch war films all the time.
Yeah.
I love them. Especially I love learning about Marines.
I feel
during
like
World War II.
I feel because you were so much closer to it, like you can appreciate it to a whole different level than I do.
As a Marine, it's like, I can look back. It's like, okay, I want to know what happened with everything.
Like when I'm watching these military movies, I'm wondering how much of it is a caricature and how much of it is true to life, and am I like just enjoying the caricature because I've never experienced that before, you know? But anyways,
so it's kind of interesting because I would say Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers does a really good job of portraying Japanese soldiers in a light that, I guess, kind of like taking your own words, they're portrayed as very honorable.
Yeah.
And it's like really kind of showcasing the strife and the suffering that they encountered like fighting in the Pacific War.
Yeah.
If you watch the show The Pacific, it does not do that.
Is it a show?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an HBO series. So if there's two series that HBO did with Band of Brothers and The Pacific.
Oh, okay.
So Band of Brothers is following an army, or I can't remember if they're Rangers or Airborne.
Yeah.
I think they're Airborne, but it's like fighting in Europe against the Germans, right? And The Pacific is kind of like the mirror version of that, but it's kind of like done so in a really brilliant way that it was kind of like done with like they're mirroring each other, right? Where you have Band of Brothers, which is going, and the whole theme of Band of Brothers is it's like these guys are behind enemy lines, the Germans are overpowering them, and it's like they're kind of grouping together and trying to overcome and beat the Germans.
Yeah.
Whereas the Pacific, the way it depicts Marines fighting Japanese soldiers, where it's like the Marines are the overwhelming force. Japan is going to lose on all of these conflicts, right? And where in like other war films that like Japan's depicted as being like really honorable and like fighting and everything, a lot of the battle scenes are shown with Japanese soldiers getting absolutely slaughtered. Like they're a lot of the time dying in really like inhumane ways. No, not stupid ways, but like inhumane ways. Like they depict there's one really like it's kind of a hard scene to watch, but I would say that I really like that they put it in the film because I think it depicts Marines as a little bit more realistic than I would like to care to admit, because a big difference between Marines and like regular military like army, right, is Marines are really brutal. Usually when they go in combat situations, there's a very high kill count. Part of how Marines are trained, but also kind of like you go through an indoctrination when you join the Marines, and you're there to kill people. Like that's your job as a Marine. You're there to kill people. You're not there to be like the hero or anything. You're there to murder everyone there.
Yeah.
Right. And especially when Marines see combat, they develop, PTSD because they're people just like everybody else. But that manifests a lot of the time in ways that aren't good, right? So there's this scene where they take over an island from the Japanese military, and there's like really intense fighting at night, and at the end, when morning happens, they're like Japan lost, right? And there's all of these Japanese soldiers that are dead on the ground, and there's like 2 or 3 guys that are still alive, but on the Marine side, like basically nobody died because they caught them in an ambush, right?
Yeah.
But there's this Japanese soldier, he's in the center of this river, and he's the only one alive around him, and the Marines are just kind of like shooting around him, just kind of joking. And it's really hard to watch, especially if you can understand Japanese, because the guy's just like begging them to shoot him. It's like, please just end my suffering, stop this.
Yeah.
And the guys are having fun shooting him, and finally, like, one of the main characters in the show ends up like shooting and killing him just to kind of put him out of his misery. But I think it's one of the first shows that I saw that really depicted like how brutal the war was. Yeah. And it kind of removed this like romanticized version that you often see of World War II with Americans and Japanese soldiers fighting each other. And it kind of put it in a really brutal light.
Well, yeah, because it's like the narrative, when we were young, growing up, it's America's the heroes coming to save the free world, but it wasn't always like that.
Yeah. And it like, especially because like these shows, like I said, this came out to mirror Band of Brothers, right? Where it's like the theme of Band of Brothers is like camaraderie, whereas like the theme in this film was like just really showcasing how horrible like both Japanese and Americans were to each other in the Pacific Theater. But it's
so you do have a lot of those war films. I feel like nowadays, though, especially in the recent years, there's been kind of a pushback to like Edo period stuff, samurai stuff.
It's really interesting. That's kind of creeped up in
like
the 2000s.
Shogun, and then on Netflix there's a documentary about the samurai, about the Sengoku Jidai,
Yeah.
And it's like, it's funny because a lot of Americans, when they think about Japanese culture, they think of samurai.
Yeah, I think just Americans being Americans, we're obsessed with war, right? Yeah. So it's like we're instantly attracted to any topic about war. Yeah. There is another book and film that I think is really, really interesting. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out. Have you ever seen Memoirs of a Geisha?
I haven't seen that.
It's
just because the main character is Chinese.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. But it's based on a book, right? It's not, they didn't just pull the movie out of their ass. Yeah. But the story kind of goes through this girl who obviously starts out as a maiko and like goes through life as a geisha, and it kind of like goes through like all the things she sacrificed. Like she didn't choose to become maiko, her parents sold her into it. But it's a really interesting story that it's kind of like changed into a way that I think is digestible for Western audiences, because maybe a lot of Japanese people don't know about this, but geisha are really looked negatively upon in Western media or in Western culture in general.
Because they name them prostitutes.
Yeah, so it's the belief that they're prostitutes, like and that they're kind of just sex slaves. So they don't even really have a choice. That's the belief.
That's the Western image of geisha.
Yeah. And so I think this is a really important film, because while it does show a girl who was sold into this, but it kind of highlights that it's just not all about sex. In fact, they talk about that, because that's one of the things that like changed after World War II, when a lot of American soldiers came over here. It's like that they thought that geisha were just prostitutes, right? So I like that exists in Western media, because it shows people
it's taking down the stereotype.
Yeah, it takes down the stereotype, and it's like, no, there's so much more to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One movie that I like. It's not a perfect movie, and in all fairness, it's not even that great of a movie.
Yeah.
You really have to kind of sift through it to get the good stuff out of it. But it's called Emperor,
and
it's
I haven't
about
heard of that.
Yeah, it's probably because it's not a very good movie, but it's basically about right after the war ends.
Yeah.
John MacArthur comes down, and he comes out, and he needs to decide if the emperor should be tried as a war criminal or not for war crimes.
Okay.
And so he sends a guy who is supposed to investigate and gather all the evidence to see if the emperor is guilty of war crimes and should be tried, or if he should be kept innocent.
Yeah.
And only the people below him, like Kido and all those people, should get should face that. And the reason why it's not a good movie is because there's this whole like unnatural love interest where in America he fell in love with a Japanese woman, and he tries to find her and finds out that her hometown was bombed and she's dead or whatever. But they have that whole thing which is so unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
But it goes through talking about the difference in mindset between Western and Japanese people that I think is very useful to think about.
Yeah.
And I think the imagery in the movie itself is also very beautiful too.
Yeah.
But it does talk about the realities of, what do we do now? And the fact that you have these two completely different ways of seeing the world coming into conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Like, how do you rectify those?
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty good movie, actually.
Yeah. So it probably definitely. I'd be curious when was that film done? Because you brought it. You mentioned earlier that like depending on the time period.
Yeah, it was 2013.
Yeah,
and they try to talk about how the emperor maybe is not as guilty as people thought he was back in the 40s.
Yeah, Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think I feel like we've kind of reached our conclusion point here.
I think we've talked about a lot of stuff already.
Yeah.
So yeah, friends, please tell us the next topic because we really don't have any more topics anymore. All right, see you later, man.
All right, see ya.